about the game project that I'm working on called The Guild of Unicorns. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So what started out as just more of a hobby I was working on while just doing a bachelor's degree at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I was studying computer science for all this technical stuff and did some software development stuff. It seemed kind of, interesting, very interesting. It felt kind of stale because you didn't really get to see anything happen from it going, just numbers would appear or something. So I wanted to apply that to some visual aspect. And at the time, I had gotten access to different modeling environments of Maya and stuff, so I could sculpt characters and stuff. I got hold of like the Gmod ponies, like back in the day, like a year or two ago, and started learning how to like get them to move and stuff. And it kind of started getting me interested in doing games, so I can combine computer programming with some visual aspect. So that would be awesome. So that's why this is like my first experience working on an actual game project, and so far I haven't built a very large team, which is basically me, and I have like a writer, and a person, I haven't like that many people on the project yet. So as it started initially as like a portfolio building project, because I was thinking about I wanted to go into game studios, so I figured, well, maybe I'll get certain things working with the characters, maybe not a full game project, but just enough so I can be like, here's my portfolio to submit to bigger studios to get into their stuff. But then, so I started working on it, and I realized how I was really getting into it, and I kind of just eventually evolved to, I want to do a full project with it, because if I could just do it and get it, and then it'd just be awesome, because you have an actual game for my little point. I mean, I really it would be awesome to develop a whole console or something like that, the whole game. So my ideas for the game is that there's certain aspects of different like RPG role-playing games where you're like say you can take Skyrim or things like that, for example, where you go out, you're basically an adventurer, you choose what you look like, what class you like to be good at, and then you go out into the world. And usually my first experience when I played was when you first start, you get like this awe effect from the world. You're like, this is so big, you don't know what's going on, because everything's totally interesting. You could just be content just hanging out in that one little spot, like chopping firewood and stuff, and just being totally immersed in it, and eventually you start moving on to bigger and better things as your character advances. One of my goals for that is that I want to be able to make it so you can still do you do those big epic adventures, but when you come back from an adventure, I want to be able to have an expansive environment of things you can do at home, kind of thing. So like you can interact with all of the NPCs, or just a lot of the simpler environment things that you can actually sit and actually like have a drink or things like that. Or sometimes like you look at Skyrim or something, you can sit, but you can't do anything beyond that. Kind of things. So I want to make it immersive, not necessarily in like a grinding way where you play the game and you do all this stuff. You can make it very visually interesting and entertaining, and just things you do interacting with the world. Let's see. So some of the features, when I initially started this, I was focusing mainly in magic. So I was focusing in unicorns when I first saw it, thinking of it just because of the aspect of interacting with the world and objects and different things like that would be difficult with ponies. Like, they have to pick stuff up with their mouths or magically orient themselves to picking up a glass in their mouth. Just, trying to animate that and just be like, ah. But recently, having been working in and stuff, I've gotten kind of inspired to start working with the other pony races and try to include them as much as I can. But like I'll have an overarching concept for like, some of the major mechanics will involve magic. But you can include different sub things that you can do with the other races that say sometimes unicorns don't do, much like you see in the show itself. Now I think I wouldn't necessarily have particular enemies. You'll have some combat enemies, but it wouldn't be like a traditional word, like you wouldn't be fighting other ponies or things like that. It would be more like just incorporeal evil or something like that. Or things that like, kind of like how like the Timberwolves are, things like that. They're kind of like animated by some type of like corrupted magic of some sort. So you would be more like going after things like that and protecting different people and saving things, little adventures and quests with that. I want to do things where it's like real-time sometimes you have like day and night cycles, and you can have time, maybe even seasons if it's possible, to just do material changes and things like that. Initially when I was building it, for the longest time I've been building it in the Unreal Engine 3. Recently, actually about a week ago, I got access to the next gen engine, Unreal 4. And I'm now moving everything, all my assets into that engine. And that's been pretty exciting because the development tools itself in that engine are like an order of magnitude easier for the developer to use to build games, which is making like, my life much better in terms of like I can actually create some type of animation or whatever it is I want to get the expected result in the engine itself. Creation arts, I'm going to go through some of the character creation stuff. So you usually start out like, you'll have sculpted the character, and you'll have like a skeletal rig, and then you rig it to the character, and then you get kind of result. Like you would animate the skeleton, and then you start, then you can, and that in turn animates your finishing everything once you've skinned it and rigged it, things like that. So also I incorporated in the engine itself, like you can see there, I have like you have bones into the hair geometry where the hair would be. You place those in there, and then for the tails you can have jiggle effect essentially, like those little jiggle bones that can move, so physically simulate real time in the engine. I also do, I want to do outfits for the characters that will actually have like clothing physics attached to them, so that way they can actually collide with the character properly and shift and move around like with clothing. And that was, for lip syncing and facial animation, they had cool software native to the Unreal Engine for thing called face effects, where it can just take an audio file and a bunch of preset, once you've built your character in a certain way, can just analyze the audio and voice and animate the character to match the voice, which is awesome because people could send me just their voice samples, and I can be able to animate the character speaking their voice. So that was really cool. Here I was working on the physics asset for the jiggle bones hair. You set up collision geometry that give weight and effect to the bones, so you can move them around and affect them dynamically rather than some type of like an animation. Here's one of a little bit of the face effects. Now this, everything you're seeing here is in Unreal 3, so it's the older gen. And actually the face effects animation is no longer in the Unreal Engine 4. They have it so the animation system itself is dynamic enough that you can just animate everything you want in an external package of Maya or something. So you get all the face animated just the way you want, and for pins you can have like face robot, really complex facial animation for the next gen of games. So my workflow for creating stuff for the engine is I usually start with ZBrush, and I can sculpt texture and do normal maps. So you can basically make high quality models to make all the texturing and like, any kind of details you want in there. Then you can render that onto a lower polymetric game resolution mesh to export it to the engine after you've rigged and animated it and set it up for some physics in Maya. So here it is. This is some of my previous work I had at EQLA a while ago. And this is so it has some of the cloth physics in the hair. It has more target animation for the eyelid blinking, and it also has some of like a simple magic mechanic, which is some levitation and interacting with boxes in the world. And this is also, again, in the Unreal Engine 3. Not that environment. That's a just like tweaked and modified a map from the Unreal Engine itself. So far, I've been doing a lot of character work. I've been recently getting into environment creation. The only reason why it took me a while is because you just have to create all the assets like the trees, and rocks, and wall texture, and things like that. Where my area is mostly focused in the character creation aspect of it and some of the mechanics. Let's see. So. let's see. So you're asking how hard is it for to become a computer programmer or like just like a game designer? It's actually not. It's not too bad. It depends. Like the coding part is more of it takes some training, but it's more of like a logical viewpoint, just an understanding of the computer's language, essentially. Where if you're doing more of the art aspect of it, where you're working more like in a tool environment, like I can read them here, you can see Maya is like you're more of just using it. You learn the tool, and then you know a workflow that. So it's not. So it's either way. It's either like you study a little bit for the computer science part of it, or you practice and train in the tool.
In terms of the tools, roughly how much are you talking about?
In terms of like, if you want in dollars, let's see. I say like the environment in here, Maya. I have access to it as a student version. It's working on. So if you wanted to buy a licensed version, it'd be about $3,000. Where, let's say the Unreal development kit, you're looking at. They have a cool program where you just pay like it's just like a small license fee that's monthly, and they take just a small percentage of your gross from any kind of sales that you make.
But there is a free alternative to Maya.
I think so.
Blender.
Yes, exactly, Blender. Yeah. So, yeah, as far as because Maya is kind of full featured to the point where you can like make film animations like that, which you don't necessarily need for game creation, because you're only going up to the point of animating the mesh and then just moving it into the engine. Yeah, also bring up my latest demo. I'm on the Golden Gates con mascot. So some of the cool things that you could do with the Unreal Engine that's new and different is that you can see real-time like programming being executed.
Then you can profile the graph that's executing.
Let's see if I can get to the simulation. But what you can do is you can watch like these nodes here. You will see you can actually watch code be executed. You can watch it travel through these lines, and so you can debug it and see it simulating in real time. It's just the screen resolution is like missing the button I have to get to do it. So like that particular piece of code, which is all can be done now visually rather than like before my code would be written in just like lines and lines of just kind of like hard to read or hard to figure out kind of like just code, just lines and lines of stuff, and trying to figure out where everything goes and connects together. It's so much easier in that in the real environment to just see it all visually, graphically, and see it happen in real time. Any more particular questions?
So with this project, you see how review, right?
Right. So currently it's just me working on this project, but what I would really love to do is start doodling a team of people to start delegating work to, I guess, like everything from modeling environment assets to particularly like concept arting, because I want to start fleshing out and looking at getting an idea and a picture of what the world's going to look like. It's going to be, we want to look at like, a medieval equestrian kind of thing, like really just old school kind of stuff. And just imagining and picturing what that would be like. And then, because if you have an art direction like that, then you can sit there and go, okay, I'm going to you choose something, and then you can start working on like creating that asset and adding and building that functionality into the game. Pardon?
Do you have any for writers, in the sense of story or text writers?
Yeah, I know I can anticipate that I will eventually. Since it's so early, it's, I guess, for me to start thinking and start making things in a larger viewpoint where you can start looking at quests and things like that is good. It's certainly something I should do. It's funny when you're working on it in such detail, you're like, characters, you're working on it. You kind of start, you can't hold on to that full big picture for like long. So it's like, it's awesome. It's great to have people who are like, they can be, like, that's why I like having writers, because they can be thinking out, farther outside the box than I am. So, definitely. So what you're able to do is, you have like a website, and so that you can be able to contact me for it if you want. If you're interested in working with the project.
Have you given any more thought to Linux support?
It's like Linux support for the game itself.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually not sure. Basically, I'm not sure if I would actually have control over that. Whether or not it depends mostly if Epic has their engine package the content for Linux.
I know they're planning.
So
I don't know if they have it.
I haven't looked into it. That would be nice if they did that. It's probably quite possible. Does anyone want to see, like, is there any particular questions in, like, some of, like, the development process or, because I could bring that stuff up, if interested.
What's your next step?
My next step would be, first I want to gather more team members, and then beyond that, my next step, what I want to do is create more powerful animation system for the characters. What I do is so that it's like more animation driven, kind of like if you look at Assassin's Creed or things like that, the movement of the character is being driven and controlled by an animation rather than just like a velocity or something. So you get more believable and realistic in the movement.
Yes, in terms of the development cycle, do you have an idea of how long it takes each step? Create character, animate, and get it in.
On that side of it, I guess I suppose I would, because I've had experience doing it a couple of times, different revisions, things like that. So I've gotten down a pretty good idea of how long the workflow is. It's usually like if you're maybe say creating a brand new character or something, maybe some new things that you have to like look at or something like that. It probably take you like a few weeks to a month or so, depending on the complexity of the character. If you're trying to do something really special, or it also depends on like if you had a skilled modeler or something like that, so they could come up, they could look at a concept and create, a creature or whatever it is quickly, then it moves along faster.
This is where like the team runs.
Exactly. It makes it so, and you have people who are specialized, and you can make it so that you can be working on something here, and then you just the asset appears, and then you can continue working. It makes it much better.
What do you expect of the writers? Do you expect them to write a story that where the players have options, or do you expect them to write something more linear?
It's a good question. So whether we have like linear story writing or like option, choice-based type of writing. I think at this early stage, mostly what I'm looking for writers is hashing out what the world environment is like. What's the current structure of the world in terms of like the economy, the history of it, background of it. What's right, kind of like more like a world building, conceptualizing with writing.
So like a lore is what you expect.
Exactly, like lore. You're basically building and constructing the lore of the world, which you can then base like so that like you having that, it can influence like concept artists and stuff like that to start narrowing the field of what the artistic style of the project is.
The elaboration on that question would be is, are you going to avoid using any current canonized objects, people, places, meanings, and history? Are you going to go with a solely unique story altogether, just using the basic world general structure?
I think that's the plan so far, is to use non-canon for now, just to avoid any kind of particular problems or issues about using canon stuff.
So I don't know if this, but this model looks a lot different from the one that you showed in the slide where you compare.
Right.
How does that progress?
So like that model we saw was from the Gmod Luna. I think that was like basically, you know, like I just took the base and then added in like the eyes and then just sculpted the hair and everything. And that was prior to when I did a little work for an indie game studio and discovered that they used a model called ZBrush that allowed them to just sculpt their characters with really nice details. And that introduced me to that, and I realized how powerful it was that I could just sculpt my own ponies. So this was from a sculpt using that program.
How's the matching system gonna work?
I'm sorry?
Like the matching system, if you put as you can.
Right. So as far as the matching system, what I wanted to do with it would be have like all the standard kind of magic stuff, and just kind of more of a brainstorm everything you can think of for magic. That's a kind of fun process. But what I really want to do with magic, be kind of almost more like a gameplay element, would be when you first start wanting to learn, like say, this particular magic spell, your character would actually not be good at it and actually kind of struggle with it. Like if they were trying to learn teleportation or something, that they would attempt to teleport, they'd either just struggle with it and not do it, or they would teleport but not end up where they wanted to be. And so that to have a kind of fun aspect to it. And then it kind of in the background, not maybe in the forefront where like say like Louis Sky or something, you can see your stats. You're more like you can kind of see the effect of getting better at a spell by both the effect of like the animation of the character reflecting their ease and use of the spell and the responsiveness of it, so you start to behave correctly. And maybe even the same case of like say flying mechanics or something. It would be like, it would require maybe a lot of input in the controller to try to control flight, where once to simulate getting becomes more second nature, it would just be simpler and simpler control scheme. Something like that, so you just be like, I want to go here, a button rather than trying to do some type of complex, yeah, more of a learning gameplay elements.
What do you work on for like a project?
Justin, how much do I work on it?
Yeah, it's just like yourself. I mean, with all the other stuff. How many hours do you do?
I probably put in at least like about 20 hours, maybe 15, 20 hours. So essentially, I kind of try to do full time as much as possible, then sometimes I do work and then off and on. I think sometimes a lot of like maybe delegating. I'm working on it, but then like talking to like a couple of the team members or something like that, working with them, and then coming back to it. A lot of times you might,
I apologize for interrupting.
it's okay.
I'm just curious, what kind of skill levels do you expect from your team? Do you expect them to most importantly be new to the genre or new to their field, or do you want someone who's more experienced and has done their job before?
I suppose I'm not really looking for like, because I wouldn't expect to find someone like it. Maybe like myself, I'm not even really like a super skilled person, like a professional necessarily per se in the field kind of thing. So I wouldn't necessarily be looking for like, I need to be professional. It's really more of just like, even people maybe who are just, they're familiar with the software would be useful. So they want to do animation something, so they've already used to it. They've done animation to some degree to the point where they can be like, I can just jump right into it. Would be probably around what I'm looking for.
Is there going to be any outwards at all?
If there's an I think I'm not sure if I'll have playable races as outdoors, but I think I might have them in there. I'm not sure, that could be fun.
What's that
Max support? I believe it does, yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're transitioning over to more recently.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask how easy it was to transfer or to migrate your project over to
So he wants to know how easy it was to migrate my old projects, files and data into new engine. Basically, the only thing that was difficult to move over to new engine was any kind of programming that I've done, because they've done away with Unreal script language and just made it in full C++ language. So any of the mechanics or functionality would have to be recreated in there, but all the assets, animations, and things like that can just be re-recorded that would play. Any other questions?
So, with all this team and the investment required, how do you fund this?
Let's see. Well, so far I've been lucky enough that it hasn't required any like substantial investment other than just my time. But I imagine if I wanted to get to the point where I wanted to release something, then I would probably do some type of like fundraising thing just to get like, you know, the necessary licenses and stuff like that for the project itself. By like a Kickstarter or something like that when the time runs. That's probably
When fully completed, we would probably release it for Xbox console business.
That would be pretty awesome to release it on a console, but honestly, it'd probably hit like a PC market first because there's the people in the Epic Games will work with you in getting the licenses and different procedures it is to ship your game on the console because it would require you actually like creating a physical disc and things like that. Oh, actually, you could do a marketplace thing, I suppose, as well, but there's certain just little hoops you have to jump through that you can do with them. And it targets both the Xbox One and PS4.
Is there anything, what happens when it's how far is
Like, how far along am I on what? Oh, an enemy's AI. I guess I haven't experimented too much with AI yet. I've created duplicates of my character and had them have simple responses to actions that my character does, such as like following me or stopping or like becoming aggressive, things like that. But not necessarily. I haven't actually done a moving enemy that could like interact and run around the world and stuff. Particularly, I guess the only reason why I haven't is because I'm still working on just like getting the character herself moving properly and or at least nicely in the world. Kind of thing. So once like these characters are done, it's just more of a matter of creating the decision engine essentially for the other characters, so they can like choose how to react and what to do based on whatever it is they see or things like that. Any other questions?
I came in a bit late. I might have missed it. What kind of game are you looking to make?
And so the kind of game is basically a open world role-playing adventure where it has like elements of, I could throw out some game types would be like a Dragon's Dogma, Skyrim, and Harvest Moon kind of things, or Fable. So basically not super focused on combat necessarily, but more on like more of a cinematic experience of exploring and progressing with your skills and things like that through the world and interacting with characters or companions that you have that you travel with to various areas of the world and then like beating people in an overall kind of story arc adventure.
So, what, generally speaking, would the end of the game look like? Would you be kind of become the archmage or what?
That's a good question. Yeah. I imagine, thinking about it, I would imagine it might, I wonder if it could possibly depend on the race you choose, because I don't know if like say if you were, a unicorn or something like that, you could be, like you could be one of the first that are like, really epic with it. Like you started, like you're not unaware of like being really awesome at whatever, at magic or something like that, but then you become, sort of like a savior or something like that, hero type character. It would be interesting to do a different type of ending for a particular race, kind of like, or a particular standing, so you would be in a different, like it'd be unique to each race of pony.
In the very far future, do you plan on adding like additional races like griffins and others? If you do get to that point.
As playable characters, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Possibly. Like a griffins would be, it's the only reason why you wouldn't would be because like maybe the riding mechanics of interacting with the world or doing things would be difficult. But if you already were doing Pegasus and stuff and characters like that, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch to like move to a griffin or something like that. Because
Well, also to add like if you like chose this race, different characters would react to you. Like in other RPGs, like some characters react to you this way through this race,
Exactly.
and react differently through the other.
yeah, and definitely, that's exactly what I was thinking when I was saying it. It's like they would have a certain bias or a kind of a stereotype opinions or some sort kind of thing. Which would all be kind of set up through all the lore and things like that of the world.
So will you be planning on adding modding support?
Some other people were asking that question. I'm actually not sure. I guess since I'm not a modder myself of exactly what it takes to, what you need to mod a game. I imagine you would need some type of development environment, like you have like a construction kit for Skyrim. It depends if I imagine if the Unreal Engine doesn't really support it, then you could always, I suppose, write one that would interface with it. Back here.
I've always loved this in games. Will there be, in the future, do you plan on having it so you can play as a villain?
The language system.
Right.
That choices.
Good or bad. I see. Kind of like Fable, you could just be totally evil and just be like, rah, and go around. I don't know. I was toying with that back. I was toying that when I was thinking about whether or not you would have combat against like the non-player characters or like other ponies. I was sitting there. I was tossing that back and forth whether or not I would allow it or not. I wasn't sure because that would basically be like, well, if you were evil character, then you would be the one that was like attacking them and that you would be trying to be defended against, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure. So at the end, I was kind of leaning away from it, but I'm not sure. Depends, I suppose. Back here.
Again, I wasn't here in the beginning. Do you plan for this to be mostly a single player experience or multiplayer?
For right now, I'm planning it to be a single player experience, mainly in that, I suppose at the moment I lack the resources to turn it into a full-fledged multiplayer experience, to do all the server programming and things like that to get it to talk to another player's computer and all those things. Which, again, I know the Unreal Engine would totally support that. It's just a matter of getting the knowledge and know-how to implement that. Any other questions? Okay.
Besides the code workflow interface, the Unreal 4, were there any other major tools that you were excited to use for Unreal 4?
Some of the really cool stuff would be they have like real-time CPU calculated physics particles. So you can have things like water drops or some type of small particles that have like weight to them or something can fall on like a character, things like that, actually move and react to whatever surface that they're colliding with, which makes like really realistic or believable water. So you can have spray or stuff, or you can have particles that move around that make light. Essentially, a lot of really cool effects that you could use for magic, things like that. So you can have particles that can move around that can actually emit light and shade the surroundings and stuff like that, which would be very fun to play with in the future.
Would there be GPU physics support?
It does. They use the NVIDIA's physics engine, and that's for like clothing and then also the destruction. So you can have like a physics calculated destructions for things like that, which I also would like to implement as well.
How are you planning on doing combat?
Yes, that's gonna be interesting. I haven't completely fleshed out exactly what I want the combat to be, depending on basically what you're fighting. But I definitely want it to be epic and more colossal like creatures, and less frequent, but more like the creatures would be more ferocious and be more desperate or something like that, for lack of a better word. So if you've experienced like a dragon's dogma or things like that, where it's like you don't go out at night kind of thing, would be the type of scenario and atmosphere that I want to create.
How many players edit your own character?
I'm gonna have that. I guess I'm going to write basically like a pony creator. Like play most RPGs, you start out and then you have like, you can adjust what they look like, how their facial structure, and their colors and stuff. You basically have all of that functionality, and even possibly like be able to create your own like QD mark image of some sort from some certain parameters, and you can apply that to your characters. So you can have as much control as possible with creating your own OC character. So that would be definitely a cool thing to support. Okay.
On the subject of QD marks, I don't know how you're going to go with this, but I think I saw this Legends of Equestria people. They said we're not going to allow the images for QD marks. And I said, why don't you have a customization system for the Halo emblem or something like that?
I imagine they have their own, since it's theirs is an MMO kind of thing where other players would be, they would see your characters, so they could be you could have offensive things or something like that on their key mark. People are wouldn't want to see that. But where if you're in a standalone game or something like that, you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about that. You can do whatever you want, I suppose, because
Well, when it gets to the multiplayer stage, that will have to be
right. Yeah, that's true.
Will there be vehicle integrations? Ways you can drive and interact with airships or sailing ships?
That's actually a really good question. I love the idea of having airships and stuff we've seen. Those would be way cool. I've even seen some of the Captain Luna stuff. You're just I'd love to feel that actually could be even maybe as I'm working on the full project, you could do little betas or small things. You could have a thing where you could just be captaining an airship. That would be awesome. As say maybe a Pegasus track, you would do that or something, or actually anyways could probably do it, but something like that would actually be pretty awesome.
Are you going to be releasing a tech demo of this?
Maybe I might. It's a little bit buggy and stuff, and it's lacking some basic control features of a HUD and stuff to close it and things like that. But the nice thing about this engine is that to package something, it's just I just go up there and just be package it to Windows. Or before, and it did boom, and then you could just run the executable in it, play. Or before, I'd have to I actually never even figured it out on the previous engine how to package your game correctly, just to send it to someone. So now it's going to make it much more likely to have playable demos and betas and stuff. Especially say if I had made a pony creator or something like that you could do in a little prologue environment to play and to test mechanics. I definitely would probably have those kind of things popping up as they come out. Okay.
How large do you plan to make your team overall? How many people do you want for this project?
I never actually thought about a particular number, I suppose. I imagine it could probably get pretty big. It's I guess there would be eventually a limit to running the number of people, but it'd be nice to have, 5 or 10 concepts artists and a couple, 2-3 modelers and a couple programmers, things like that, texture artists.
If you do manage to make this multiplayer, are you still going to allow custom features?
I don't know. If it's only up to me, it doesn't really bother me. So because I don't know how possibly, yeah. You could make a disclaimer or something or whatever it is, because you wouldn't want to limit, because you could have a whole OC all the time and then you couldn't have your own custom humor. It could be annoying. So it's there's just that trade-off.
Yeah, so when you do get to that stage, are you thinking of releasing some kind of betas or stuff like that? Some of the other games like that?
Yeah, because it would be nice to get feedback of just to see what the experience of others is, because just running it on one computer or things like that, you wouldn't maybe detect bugs or things like that from different hardware, or just to get the general reaction from the community of what they think of it and things. So that's a definite plan. I want to have whole betas and stuff that people can try.
How do you plan on getting funds for this? Because so far, if you do everything you're saying, I'd be definitely willing to pay money for this, but I'm just interested. Are you going off donations or microtransactions, or what are your plans?
I suppose, I would probably maybe do like I always leave it open to donations if people wanted to have like a little donate button if they wanted to. But I suppose if I reached a point where I really needed funds or something like that, so to say like if I didn't have a large team, I could just maybe gather funds to commission and freelance artists to create whatever content it is I needed. So then I'd probably set up some type of Kickstarter or Indiegogo, things like that, to start raising. Thank you.
You plan to be making income off this, and if so, how are you going to avoid Hasbro coming in with a copyright?
For the moment, I know eventually I'll have to like study in detail how far the scope of their copyrights is, but for now I'm just avoiding using like the canon characters and their world essentially, I guess, calling it like Equestria and making Ponyville and Canterlot and it looks the same kind of thing. But if you just did a stylized version where, it's like, it could look like Equestria, but it would look more like some realistic thing and like maybe some medieval concept of what it would look like. It's just more of the general world topography kind of thing,
So you would be expecting to earn cash off this and to keep yourself supported via this?
Yeah, like eventually, maybe in the far future, if it was like a real successful project, then yes, but it wouldn't be like, it's not necessarily like my sole income thing. It's more of like my hobby because I do work and stuff, so it's not like, like everything rides on this. I think that's not necessarily the case.
So your team could come in as just support and not be paid at all, or come in and not be expected to be paid?
Possibly. It's an interesting issue. That's kind of one of the things that made me a little bit like gun shy of getting a whole team because I wasn't sure how that worked and people would like upset or something. But that's why maybe it might make it more of just maybe not revenue generating, so you could just have it that, or if it did, we would work that out. Maybe do more freelance or something like that. Figure that out.
Going off that last question, are you going to be placing your game, your world, in what's already established as Milo Pony Universe, or are you going to make your own fantasy world with custom locations and mythical places that don't yet exist?
Probably maybe like a blend of that, where you have locations that would, like you would think that would say that would be Canterlot, but it would have a stylized approach to it. It would be, similar perhaps in like certain aspects, but it would be like a different setting and different kind of style and architecture and stuff like that. It would be interesting to have artistic freedom on it.
Just enough not to be seen.
Before you go too far in getting
Exactly. This was particularly in like the infringement area, right? Yeah. Because at the moment, I'm not, because it's like, we'll have to get more.
So whether you derive revenue from it or you still
Right.
especially if you've got very close or after well, we get shut down.
Exactly.
So talking to someone sooner than later is probably
Question right here?
Yeah. What do you plan for this to be rated, Louis? Do you plan on having any kind of blood or language or?
Not necessarily have like it would be more of like the only reason why I would have rating would be maybe for like scary elements and things like that, or an intensity of some sort, like kind of thing. So I wouldn't have anything like particularly like violence of like too major violence or anything like that. And so no, not probably like
Cartoon violence?
Cartoon romance?
yeah, essentially nothing.
Fight Club.
Right, so nothing too offensive. I think.
Nothing cupcake style, essentially.
flying high.
So would it be like a story mode or different each time?
I wouldn't want it to. So you're thinking like, I would want it to be like a sandbox in a way, so you don't necessarily, kind of like Skyrim, how you can follow the story kind of, you know, it's its own, it has its plot, and has a whole arc, and but you wouldn't have to follow it, you can just, because some people, at least particularly I do, I like to just, sometimes I'll turn it on and just, I just want to exist in the world and not have to do particular things, like, especially if you had a game where it's very story driven, like a Halo or things like that, where you just do the same thing over and over. There's just one campaign that you do. It's a story. Where I want mine, I guess, it'd be somewhat more of a setting driven or something like that. So you have the whole world in this setting, these things happening, but you know, you're not like being pushed along. If that makes sense. Okay.
What about like replacing like blood with like confetti or something like that?
I don't know, I haven't given a huge thought to like that particularly, you know, like, I guess I never thought, like, thinking about combat and stuff, you wouldn't necessarily fight like living creatures where you had like blood and stuff. I had a kind of system where I didn't really like it when your main character gets like hit and struck a lot, and it kind of looks unrealistic, where initially I wanted it where you had, as a unicorn, you could use your magic, like willingly, like focus on using it, but even if you didn't focus on like protecting yourself or defending yourself from something, you would have instinctive magic that would defend you, but at a cost of like, fatiguing you and different things like that, and losing concentration on the other magic that you're casting. So you wouldn't necessarily ever get hit, but if you got to the point where like you would fail your magic eventually, it would be more like that. Instinct magic would save you from so you'd be teleported away or done something to disable whatever it is that's attacking you. And so you wouldn't necessarily be harmed directly. If it was something major, like this, like you would just go, but it's something simple, I don't know, like a scripted action, it's like a cinematic sequence or something like that, then I can control what's going on. So that's it.
Will the game always be in third person, or will it be at the first person?
I guess so far the plan was just always third person.
First person pony would be kind of boring because there's not much to look at.
There's a person over there at the booth near me. He's also working on it, but he's using Oculus Rift. He's like, he wanted to have the Oculus Rift attached to like the head of the pony character, so you could like look behind you and you were a pony kind of thing. I thought that was kind of a hilarious idea. That would make it more interesting. Then you could be like, you can run around and do stuff. That'd be cool. Okay.
So when it comes to combat, do you plan to make it turn-based or real-time?
I would make it real time. Although it would be the biggest challenge for that would be to make it, look nice and believable. That would be like my big thing. Right?
What era or what sort of technology would be?
It'd be like a medieval era. That basically like bows and arrows and stuff. Swords, knives, things like that.
Some steampunk in there too, like as well, like arcane based steampunk.
Yeah. So you would have like, because since there's a lot of magic in the world, they could have magically powered machinery, things like that. So it's like, you look at it really like a medieval like setting in terms of like, it wouldn't have technology, but they could still have tools and machines potentially because of the use of magic.
Like the dwarves in Skyrim.
Right. Yeah, things like that.
So you currently have a website set up for this?
Yes, I do. It's, yeah, regular games, I believe.
You said that there's going to be a large focus on magic in the game, and I was wondering, will we get going into any sort of black magic, like Sombra's magic that we saw used by Agui Sombra and briefly by Celestia and Twilight? And if so, how would that work differently?
That would be a fun one. I think a lot of times you might find yourself up against magic at that time and things, and then you might discover ways of utilizing it to your benefit. Because like say that you found yourself in a realm that was, totally infected and, under the influence of that magic, you might have to find yourself utilizing it to make things happen that you want, because if other magic can just be repelled.
Right. And this could tie into being the villain. For instance, black magic, it gives you a lot of power, but it either in order to utilize it, you have to go through shady rituals, or there would be a lot of collateral damage involved.
Right. So you could have it could be like a kind of like a Fable type style storyline where you're still doing an eventual point, but it's more of your reputation of how you got there could be affected, because you could use magic and stuff, because it could be more fun and faster or efficient in some way, but it's you're using this dark evil magic instead.
Yeah, and I can imagine it would make interaction with NPCs far more difficult.
Exactly. They have this, your reputation would start preceding you.
Yeah.
That thing could be fun.
Yeah, you could, or in a similar way to Fable, perhaps you could do it in a way like Star Wars with the Republic, where it doesn't really affect the story that much until some certain points, but it's more for gameplay changes. But you can use it for more gameplay changes, like in Star Wars with the Republic, than for total story changes in in Fable.
Right. That's a good idea, where you can use it to just change more of an immediate situation and stuff like that. That would be good. Okay, you can just avoid some particular thing. Okay.
Another reference continuing off of what he went off is that you could also make it similar to Infamous, to where it just depends of how combat plays out. Like if you're using normal, good magic, whatever you want to call it, the ending of the battle is more peaceful, while if you use dark magic, it ends up being more dark of how the battle ends.
Yeah, that would be a good way to have a repercussion of some sort. So if you do use that, it's you might not get the ending would be altered to a certain degree because of that. Maybe more dark.
First one is, that'd be cool if you could implement the outcome handling in there somewhere. If you could, the final goal is to go get it from someone that's trying to wield it for ultimate power. And then the second thing is, you could have set dialogue options, but if you go more good, you can't say more evil options. It's not enough to say that.
Right.
Or vice versa.
Right, you would have, because of your alignment, you would have more influence one way or the other. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, I apologize, I forgot the question.
Oh, that's fine. But you hear me, right? Any more questions? Right.
Not so much a question, but I just like to say that it looks very impressive.
Thank you. That's essentially my initial goal is to make it at least as impressive as possible, so you enjoy being in the world and try to make it and things like that is the primary goal.
So I was wondering, even though the release date with or it seems like a very rough estimate, could be a very rough estimation. Do you know when you could have a beta?
My goal is to have some type of beta version, maybe a prologue thing where it sets up what your character could look like, basically the creator part, and maybe how you choose your companion and things like that, and the whole thing of a little prologue demo. Hopefully maybe by ReleaseCon. Something it all depends on honestly, the only things I foresee that could be difficult for me to finish could be constructing a nice and pretty environment and stuff, just because of the work of creating all the assets and stuff. I've had a few concept artists and a couple of modelers, things like that. It would be definitely feasible to do it within 4 or 5 months.
What sort of ambient sound is there?
I do have a very nice composer, but I will have this awesome music. But for the sound, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure exactly how it is. I'll go back. I know we generate and record, you know, any particular sound. If there's particular stuff you want, I imagine I could probably feel like there's online resources of like all kinds of sounds. If I wanted something really particular, I couldn't find or generate myself. That's probably how I would go and see places like that to get those kind of resources. But for the world, I imagine it'd probably be a lot of ambient sound because I want the world itself to be kind of heavily influenced by magic, or have like a magic aura and stuff. That's like the plants and the world around you has some type of magic properties that you can influence or kind of communicate to through magic, things like that. So you can so you have not only like, you don't always have just like events of magic. It can just be more of like, it's pretty because you can influence or do things or cause things to happen using your magic. So that'd be elements you can do for gameplay.
A world so heavily influenced by magic, how do you exactly run magic if the player wants to play something like a Pegasus or a Rainbow?
I don't know, since I've recently been thinking that, I've heard suggestion things like you could have, maybe even just like a defensive magic, something could be some type of enchanted objects of some sort. Or it might be just where you, because since it's primarily unicorn based, you might just have less functionality for those characters, but you still can interact with the world, but you maybe have just different things that you can do that's like, that's a different set of things that that particular race can interact with. And more skill with, or maybe let's say Pegasus, they would be able to influence like weather and clouds and things like that, where unicorns wouldn't necessarily do that. Earth ponies would have a different set of skills. But at the very least, it's just allowing the player to be able to play in the race they want, where the main mechanics of it would probably be towards unicorns and magic.
Maybe like different racial, like you're born with this type of magic, like earth ponies are born with natural strength, and maybe that can be connected to magical ties.
Right, since you can kind of stylize it more, you can almost think of it as like, somebody that talked about like earth ponies can be like earth magic, they can bend something kind of thing, kind of like a mountain pie seem to have epic ability to move rocks kind of thing. So it's like you can have some of those qualities from other races, and then just have an obvious magic, they have a different style of doing things. Another question? So there's no more questions? And thank you guys for coming.